Ever feel like your emotions are just running the show? Like you're totally along for the ride?
It can feel that way sometimes, right?
Totally. But what if we actually have more control than we think? What if we could, kind of choose how we feel?
Now that would be a game changer.
That's exactly what we're diving into today, this whole idea of emotional freedom.
I'm intrigued. Where do we even begin?
Well, you've shared some amazing insights with us about emotional well-being, especially some stuff from Speaker's Name that really resonated.
Oh yeah, their perspective is so interesting.
Totally. So today we're doing a deep dive on some of those ideas, like what's the real difference between, say, emotions, feelings, moods, even intentions?
Oh, okay, yeah, those are some important distinctions.
Plus, we're going to unpack this framework that could honestly change how you see your whole emotional landscape. It's called the 4Ds. Super excited to break it all down. But first, let's talk about this idea of emotional freedom. What does that even mean? To be free from something as natural and powerful as our emotions.
I think what often trips us up is that we think of freedom as being free from something.
Right, like we need to escape it.
Exactly. But when it comes to emotions, real freedom isn't about denying them. It's more about, understanding them, like navigating them with more awareness, with more intention.
Okay, let's talk about intention for a sec, because that seems like a big theme in a lot of what you shared. It's like instead of just reacting to whatever emotion pops up, we can actually hit pause and decide, like, okay, how do I actually want to feel in this moment?
Exactly. And that is a huge point.
Uh,
Speaker's Name is really challenging this whole idea of just blindly accepting every single emotion as like inherently valid.
Interesting.
They're really pushing for a more proactive approach, a more empowered approach.
That's really interesting because you hear so much these days about just letting yourself feel everything fully right.
Right.
So how do we balance that honoring our emotions with this more intentional way of being?
I think it starts with understanding the difference between emotions, feelings, and moods. Speaker's Name defines emotions as these like automatic reactions, impulsive, physical, very short-lived.
Okay.
They're like quick bursts of energy. That's it.
So like the fear you feel when you're watching a scary movie.
Perfect example. Or how about that jolt of terror you get in a haunted house?
Oh, the best.
Your heart's racing, you might scream. But the thing is, that initial fear, the pure emotion, it fades super quickly.
Yeah, you're laughing about it 5 minutes later, wondering why you were even scared in the first place.
Exactly. But here's where we tend to get tripped up. We take these fleeting emotions and then we start, attaching all these stories to them, giving them all this meaning.
And those become feelings.
Exactly.
And that's when things can spiral, right?
Totally.
So instead of that fear just fading away, we're like, okay, I was scared of that, which means this about me or that about my life. And suddenly this 90-second blip of fear turns into a whole mood.
And that is the crucial distinction. If we can just recognize the difference between those initial fleeting emotions and then the feelings and moods we layer on top of them, that's where we start to reclaim our power.
So it's not about ignoring our emotions.
Yeah.
It's more about choosing how we respond to them.
Yes. And choosing how long we want to let them stick around. And that, I think, is where this idea of intention comes in.
Okay, so if we're not supposed to just accept all our emotions without question, where do we even start? How do we shift the way we experience them?
Because once you understand that you're not like a victim to your emotions, that's when you start to make different choices. It's like Speaker's Name says, intention is the override switch.
Ooh, I like that. Flipping the script on those automatic reactions.
Yeah.
So instead of being reactive, we can be proactive.
Exactly. And to help make that shift, Speaker's Name talks about this framework, the 4Ds. They didn't give too many details on what you share, but it seems like a really practical way to put this into practice.
Love it when things are practical.
Right. So we're talking about distilling, disrupting, directing, and designing your emotional experience.
Okay, that sounds super intriguing, and I definitely want to unpack each of those Ds. But before we do, can we back up for a second and talk more about this whole intention thing?
Sure.
Because for a lot of us, it can feel kind of out there, right? Like, can we really just choose to feel happy or calm whenever we want?
It's a great question, and it's something Speaker's Name really gets into. And the short answer is...
Well, it's kind of hard to argue with that.
Right.
Intention as an override switch.
Right.
It's a cool idea, but like you were saying, it also takes real practice.
It does, because so much of what we're talking about requires a real shift in perspective.
Totally. Like, instead of seeing ourselves as these victims of our emotions, we can start to see ourselves as like the creators of our experience.
Precisely. And one of the best examples, I think, came up in your notes. It was speaker's name's experience, choosing not to stay in a bad mood.
Oh, right. That really stood out to me, too. What was that all about? Because I think a lot of us, like, we wake up grumpy and we're just like, well, that's just how it is today.
Exactly, exactly. But they're like, nope, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. And again, it's not about denying those initial feelings. If you wake up frustrated,
Yep.
it's about making a conscious choice to shift, choosing a different thought, a
Yeah.
different feeling, and allowing yourself to move through it.
So you recognize that just because you feel a certain way, it doesn't mean you have to become that feeling.
Yes, yes.
Like, I might feel stressed,
Right.
but I don't have to let stress run my entire day.
Exactly. That is a perfect example of this whole idea of intention in action, right? You might not be able to control that initial wave, but you can control how you respond. You can choose to let it consume you. Or you can choose to manage it, to find those moments of peace and joy throughout your day.
Okay, but how do we actually do that? I mean,
Yeah.
it's easy to say, I'm choosing joy today, but then life happens, right?
It does.
So how do you actually, like, feel it?
Right. And that's where these 4Ds come in. Think of them like tools. Yeah. They help you navigate this emotional landscape more intentionally.
Okay, I'm ready to unpack these tools. Remind us, what are the 4Ds?
All right. So the first D is distill. This is all about learning to identify your patterns, those emotional triggers.
Okay.
What are the things that set you off? Could be situations, people.
Thoughts even, right?
Yeah. It's about awareness, right? So that you can start to anticipate and eventually even interrupt these patterns.
And that leads us to disrupt.
There you go.
So once you've identified these triggers,
Mm-hmm.
how do you actually stop them in real time?
Okay, so that's where things get really interesting, and we're going to get into exactly how right after this quick break.
All right, so we are back and ready to really dig into disrupting these emotional patterns. So you're saying we don't have to just get swept away. We can, like, actually stop it.
Yes, you've got this. Imagine you're standing on the shore. You see those waves crashing in. You're not just stuck there watching. You can actually do something. You know what I mean? You've got tools. You could build a breakwater or change your position entirely. You could learn to surf.
Okay, I love the analogy. But, like, how does that work in real life? Say with that coworker who always seems to push your buttons. What do you do?
That's when you bring in those specific disrupt techniques, right? We're talking deep breaths, mindfulness exercises, even just reframing those negative thoughts. These are all ways to hit the pause button.
Oh, I see. So instead of just instantly reacting,
Mm-hmm.
getting defensive or frustrated or whatever your pattern is,
Yeah.
you take a breath, you maybe try to see things differently, and then you choose how to respond.
Exactly. You're taking back control of that emotional roller coaster.
Which brings us to direct. So, okay, you've disrupted the pattern. Now what?
Now you get to decide. Direct is about choosing the feeling you want to bring to that moment.
Okay.
Maybe it's calmness, maybe it's assertiveness, maybe even humor. It really depends.
So going back to that coworker, instead of letting their negativity drag me down, I could try to approach them with empathy. Or even just try to lighten the mood.
Exactly. You're not trapped in that old pattern anymore. You're choosing a different path, one that feels better.
I love it. Okay,
Mhm.
I am really starting to see how all of this fits together.
Ugh.
But we haven't gotten to the last D yet. Design. That one sounds really powerful.
Right, because this is where you zoom out. You look at the big picture of your emotional landscape. What kind of environment do you want to create for yourself day to day?
Oh, interesting.
What feelings do you want to cultivate more of? Is it joy, gratitude, peace, maybe even a sense of adventure?
So it's about setting intentions not just for certain situations, but for how you want to feel overall in your life.
Exactly. Think of it like gardening. You wouldn't just let your garden grow wild.
Right.
You tend to, right? You choose the plants you want. The same goes for your emotional well-being.
So we choose the thoughts and habits that, like, nurture the feelings we want.
Yes. You're designing your own emotional ecosystem.
This has been such an incredible deep dive. We've covered so much ground today. But before we wrap up, I want to touch on something you said earlier about, not being victims to our emotions. That we have more of a choice than we think. It's powerful.
It really is. Because I think it's easy to feel kind of overwhelmed by everything we feel.
For sure.
But the truth is, you're not powerless. You have the ability to choose, to respond in a way that serves you. And the more you do it, the easier it gets.
You create a new normal for yourself.
Ye-
I love that. And speaking of creating, I wanted to leave everyone with a little something to think about this week. We've been talking about how to choose how you want to feel in any given moment. But what if you could choose just one feeling to carry with you throughout your day, every day? One feeling that would help you be your best self no matter what. What would it be and how do you think it would change your life? Let us know. And until next time, keep exploring, Keep choosing, keep diving deep.